This, welcome to Poems On. The theme, and we do each show on a theme, and the poems must relate in one way or another to the chosen theme. And the theme of this particular show is memory, one that I'm sure everybody in the room has many poems they could relate to. I normally ask the new guest to introduce and then read first. So I'm going to ask Alexis to start us off. David will go next, and I will bring up the reader. And so, shall we begin?
We shall.
Take it away.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me. This is super exciting. I'm Alexis. I'm the author of this one book, Out of Order. One of the main themes of the book is memory and childhood, so I'm just super happy that I get to sort of premiere with such a fitting topic. I want to start with this first one. It's called Golden Years, and I talk a lot about pop culture in my poems. So this, of course, Golden Years is a David Bowie reference. Golden Years. When Christine asks me to describe my history of depression, I tell her about the Christmas video. I'm 4, maybe 5, twirling a pigtail while my brother opens his toy race car. "You look so sad," my mother said years later. I didn't realize. Christine hands me a box of tissues and I joke that I can't believe I'm crying. At night, I wander in dark-lit rooms while Bowie croons through headphones. I dream of handcuffs, of running pointy fingers through a young man's curls, a serrated knife scraping a slope of a smile onto his flesh. Even the sun is a philanderer, bringing home roses to every woman on earth, its rays shading its face like a cap.
Thanks. So, you got some violent imagery later on in that poem. I think that the personification of the sun as a philanderer, where even the light that we usually think of as a gift from the sun is turned into a tainted gift because it's being offered instead of what the true feeling should have been. When you access memories like this, I mean, we all access memories when we're writing poems. Sometimes we're accessing pleasant ones. In this case, not so pleasant. But I think in each case, we try to cope with the act of memory in the process of composition as a way of kind of getting some kind of handle on the memory and maybe imposing some kind of order. Do you feel any of that, even when you're dealing with such tough memories? Does it give you some kind of small resolution to be able to talk about them in this way?
Absolutely. I started writing this book when I was 19, and my dad passed away when I was 11, and the 8 years in between, it wasn't something I felt like I could really talk about verbally yet. So I think something I really like about poetry, and formal poetry in particular, is that you're taking back those situations you had no control over, and you're sort of trying to make as much order of it as you can, even though it is a really painful memory. So you sort of say, okay, I have no say in what happened, but what I want to do is take it back, sort of, take some ownership of it, and tell my narrative, which I like to do in these poems. I think when it comes to memory, I've noticed that I usually write the poems after a lot of time has passed. And that's not just because it's painful at the time, but also because I think after a certain amount of time goes by, you have the distance that will impact your poem. So if you're sort of in the midst of some kind of emotionally charged disaster or even something good, the poem will be a lot different than if you write that same poem 3 years later. Do you know what I mean? And I can look at it more objectively.
Yeah, it's hard to write when when the emotion still has you by the throat. I mean, David, you're going to read some poems that are where the memories are. I mean, we're in a position to look back at, shall we say, greater distance.
Go
Love you.
But do you feel the same way? I mean, I often feel like I have to
Al,
relive the things that I
Al,
write about.
You're only a week younger than me. In fact. So we are. I love the play on golden years, occupying them as we perhaps are
And do.
There's also an ironic meaning to that because there's also the golden age, which is always of the past. It's ironic, you know, and you've got David Bowie in there. I like using pop songs in my, but to you they wouldn't be pop songs. Not to, you know, David Bowie is new to me. No, I know who David is. I'm a young American. So.
All right.
So anyway.
Can I say something? That David Bowie was born the same year, 1947.
Well, you know, he came to.
Okay.
He's after the Beatles, isn't he?
A little bit. But so you're going to read some poems. Why don't you read one now?
Yeah.
Where the distance does impose a kind of an irony, which is a little bit different way of coping
Oh, the irony, yes.
with the memory.
Yes.
Whichever one you want to do first.
Yeah, I'll do Money, which has some allusions to popular culture, which I don't know people will continue to get, which is actually a thing, you know. What details we include so that the poem will last or not. It's called Money. One Sunday, when my sober dad unscrolled $1 for the week's apportionment, he slowly stretched it out across my palm like a giant navigation map that could be used to track the Amazon or the hills of Africa. Don't spend it all in one place, my father said. I bought a chocolate ice cream sugar cone, a pink Spalding rubber ball, and a Sergeant Rock comic book. The hero's jaw consuming 3/4 of the cover, clamping down on the pin of a grenade. But if I'd saved my money for the 5 school days ahead, I could have bought a yo-yo and a pack of bubble gum and baseball cards, and still have in my palm a silver coin left over to show Elaine, the girl who sat across from me, the girl I knew I'd love forever.
Yeah. Can you place that as in grade context for us?
It's 6th grade.
6th grade.
Yeah, about 12.
Yeah. And have you loved her forever?
After a fashion. After my fashion. But eventually not. I didn't go past the 6th grade. Because it was unrequited. But
So,
Maybe if you'd given her the coin.
well, one would wonder whether any coin, however shiny, would impress anyone now.
yes, that was a quarter.
But that's part of the period charm of it, that all of those details are comprehensible to people of a certain age. Although there's got to be some of those details were still part of your childhood, right?
Yeah, I think everything is. I mean, you know, actually what stands out to me as being the most foreign, I guess, is the navigation map.
Yeah.
There are very, very few places in life I can go without my GPS.
Yeah.
I'll have to put it in my phone just to get around the block. And my mom was telling me about how back in the day there was a thick book of maps that you had to go through. What is this? I don't necessarily believe her. That sounds a bit far-fetched. So.
Well, there certainly were books of maps, but more to the point, everyone had in her or his glove compartment a stack of road maps for places that they had driven to and needed a map to guide them to. And so they would fold out and be very large, and then fold in and be this size and fit in the glove box. So I understand this is an antediluvian concept, but it's what we had, and we used to say the map is not the territory. I don't know whether you could say the GPS is not the territory, but anyway. So your way, I mean, there are no serrated edges in your poem. So this is it's a more comfortable memory, but it's still got its twinge.
Right. If I backtracked and worked back further, I remember my father and you know, the allowance and the cheapness and the lack of sobriety, and I mean, if I work back further, you know,
Yeah.
and that Elaine wouldn't look at me, you know, and
Wow.
you know.
But you can't put everything in one poem. I'm
Right.
sure you've got.
No, I'm just saying it is a kind of romantic view.
You know, I want to come to the idea of the sobriety or lack thereof of
Yeah.
your father, because the other two poems you're going to read both reference that.
Yeah.
And your poems also reference your parents individually. And so what I'm going to start with does the same thing. It actually puts into context for my later life one of my earliest memories. It's right around the first thing that I ever remember. And this is called How I Learned About Parenting. And what I like to do with memory poems is to present the memory, but then put it in a context for later on. And I think you'll see that when we get to the end. Excuse me. How I Learned About Parenting. At 4, I got away with stealing cream. Or so I thought. That had to be the year. When I was 5, we left the tenement and moved out to the park, all by ourselves. That house had a milk box with a cover. But when my family lived in the apartment, the creaking of the milkman on the stairs up to the second floor would wake me up. And I would tiptoe by the bedroom door and make sure that my parents were asleep. New light was coming through the kitchen window, so I could see the cut glass of the doorknob and use both hands to turn it noiselessly. There on the floor, outside the open door, I'd kneel before the slim and graceful bottle. The milk back then was whole and separated and cold from standing in the empty hallway. It was protected by a paper lid inside the glass mouth, like a Dixie cup, and covered by a waxy paper cap, held on by folded flaps around the rim. I used my fingernail to pick one free and ease it open just enough to loosen and remove the cover. Then the tab had to be pried and pulled to lift the lid. I knew the tasty cream was on the top. Its color pure, like in the catechism where white milk in the bottle represented the spotless soul when in a state of grace. And I would drink a little, not too much. Then I'd replace the lid, and putting on the cap, I'd press the loose flap back again. And no one ever mentioned it. As though no one could tell the quart was less than full. As though no one could know that it was me. I'm an only child. So.
The cream of the crop.
Not much of a crop, though. But yeah, and you've got to be of a certain age, or I guess now you can get whole milk delivered. But for a very long time, all the milk was pasteurized and homogenized. And in my latter years, there was no point in trying to score some cream.
Did you get the chocolate milk in those bottles?
We could have, but that wasn't something that my parents would have ever ordered.
Countenance, yeah.
But the unspoken point that contextualizes the experience in the poem is the unanswered question of why my parents never said anything. Do you have any ideas about that? They must have known.
Well, the wisdom, your parents had distance from you. They were relaxed enough with you to give you that kind of reign over what you can do. So it's the beginnings of a sense of humor too. Because I think maybe the speaker in the poem sees the irony a little bit. Knows that knows that the consequences, although moves very cautiously, so the consequences, maybe is aware of the consequences. Yeah. So there's a cat and mouse. The milk, we can take this on, but there is a cat and mouse game.
Yeah.
Which is parenting in a certain way.
And that's why it's called How I Learned About Parenting, because my parents let me slide. They trusted me.
Yeah.
And that was establishing a pattern that was to be consistent throughout the rest of their whole lives and the bigger part of mine. So I was very fortunate that way. But this is very much a kind of a memory of its time in its detail, but in terms of the emotional dynamic, any parent that trusts is giving a child an invaluable gift, assuming the child doesn't go haywire.
Because the child is able to take risks there and realize, in the context of the poem, is able to realize this character, this impish character, this kind of little devil.
Yeah.
You know.
But shh.
Yeah.
Don't let that out.
Yeah.
Well, something I really like about the poem is, first of all, the parents are, essentially not really characters, right? But something I really like is that when we talk about, parents trusting you, it's not like the speaker of the poem is going completely nuts and doing all kinds of, destructive things. I mean, you even talk about like tiptoeing and like using two hands to sort of sneakily open the doorknob. So at the end, it's sort of like that twist. And I wonder if that has to do with letting it slide.
Well, it's funny, I had a sense of morality without having yet experienced any punishment. I'm going to ignore that. Because I don't really know where it came from, but it was true. I thought, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't want them to find out. And then I have other poems about a few years later when I found out. But I'm not reading those today. So let's go back around and begin the circle again. And what do you have for your second offering, Alexis?
Okay, my second poem is called Seven. So something that I recently learned is, I guess, that my memory is sort of abnormally good, freakishly good almost. I was talking to a friend of mine who said that it isn't particularly normal that I could tell you my schedule from 5th grade and the names of all the teachers and this and that. I don't know, I'm sure you could both do it. But the problem with having such like a precise memory is that it makes it sort of difficult to let go of the things you should have said or done. And in my case, it's actually, I wish I had told more people off. And that comes up a lot in this book. It's always like, oh, I have this fantasy where I said this. Or, I have this recurring dream where I told this person, you're wrong. So I think memory and fantasy sort of intertwine. This one is called Seven, and I think it will be relevant forever, unfortunately. And I'm sure we've all had those situations, whether it's in bars or at a conference or any kind of social event where someone tries to give you some sort of unsolicited advice about your life without even knowing you. And it's always just useless platitudes that that nowadays you'd hear on a podcast kind of thing. Like, like, hey friend, like, boundaries, all this kind of stuff that they misuse and just sort of throw around. So this is based on an experience I had with a random guy in this random bar, and it's called 7. So tell me, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate your life? Somehow, again, I found myself inside a stranded bar with made-up drag queens, doughy bankers. Far away, the girls I came with flirt with men in navy cargo pants and boat shoes. When was that in fashion? I'm all set to leave, depart in silence, pizza my reprieve, until the strange man corners me and chirps, what would you rate your life? Long-nailed, he slurps what could be one of those Long Islands, though I just don't care. Probably years ago I'd beam, but now I want to take a knife and twist it into his perfect dimple. Life? A rating system? No hello, not even a cheeky wink? But I choke out, 7? His mouth falls open, slug-like eyebrows raised. A pretty girl? Just 7? I'm amazed. I'd give my own a 9. 32 years, near perfect. Girls behind me clink their beers, engage in bored, half-hearted conversation. Skewered shrimp abound, the pink crustacean I envy. Yes, I'd rather jab a stick through me than talk through this simple-minded dick. He presses on. Look, I'll be honest. I think it's rather sad you'd classify your life so low. I mean, how old are you? Too young to be so jaded. Cheese fondue, tiny cocktail dresses, toothpicks, just me. He looks at me not with disgust, but hardly warmth, intrigue, or lust. I picture pizza men, my couch. I'd skip this lecture in some other sweet world, but now I'm stuck. 7's fine, I say. It's passing. Fuck, I want this to be over. Yeah, I guess, he snorts. But don't you ever, obsess about how things could be? Why settle? Fake it till you make it. I think you should make better decisions and you'll find the world isn't so bad. Later, I'll wish I'd twirled and stomped away or kneed him in the gut. Used mom's kickboxing skills, jab, uppercut, blinded the cocky sucker. How dare he? A stuck-up bastard whose reality was some sick fantasy. Clearly, he never had gone through any hardship whatsoever. Better decisions? Really? I'd decided to be so young and old at once, divided into 15 equally punctured parts. Yes, when I got my Master of Fine Arts, I chose to lie face down all day. A child, I simply checked a box, cross-legged and smiled, that said I wanted my old man to die. My God, who is this freakish, dimpled guy? But reader, you and I both know the facts. I'm the kind of girl who never quite reacts, the kind whom others pity for attracting guys who what? Love their own lives? Love acting superior? Later, I'll wish I'd said, well, anything, but it fills me with dread to even dream about making a scene. So I just laugh, yeah, I see what you mean. Nice meeting you, and hope to leave composed. By now, I know the pizza place is closed.
Damn, it don't ever get no pizza.
But reader, you could have written the same poem without but reader.
Okay.
But it means something to me that you imagine a sympathetic ear who will empathize with you in this ridiculous situation. And I wonder if we have that if we have reader, that kind of reader, because in the emotional context of that poem, it's really important as a counterbalance to have someone who can hear this from a different place look at you in this difficult place and maybe hold off the same kind of judgment for the guy in the bar that he was so quick to impose on you without any evidence at all. And I'm not responsible for where this thinking comes from, but boy, is it dumb.
Yeah, it is. And I've been thinking about that a lot, about why people are so quick to blame other people and things in situations like this. And I think it's because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think deep down everyone sort of wants to believe life is fair. So if I'm in a bar and I'm saying, oh, my life is a 7, which, this guy interprets as the biggest tragedy he's ever heard, that 7 is so low for a young person, I think there's a certain level, just like in society, maybe it's subconscious, where you want to believe, oh, this girl's a 7 because she's not making good decisions. Because otherwise you have to admit that something bad or unhappiness could happen to you.
Despite making good decisions.
Despite making these so-called good decisions.
Yep.
Like harassing, lecturing girls in a bar. Not a great decision. But yeah.
Well, you want that interlocutor, you want that reader, because the speaker is utterly trapped. So you need, it almost invites the reader to come in and savor in that respect. It's a wonderful poem. I love it's a pas de deux, but I'm reminded in the prior session, we are at Poetry by the Sea. There was a wonderful discussion of Frost, and specifically Home Burial. Familiar poem, but in a graver context, but maybe similarly dark. This is a couple who has just buried their child. The father has dug the child, and the indictment of the father from the mother is very powerful, and all the guy can say is empty aphorisms, or that sound empty to her, like this kind of pap that this guy is spewing. In another sense, it's kind of a criticism of American values, American culture, where we go for these. Everybody's got to have a smiley face,
Right.
and the like. So wonderful poem, wonderful dialogue back and forth, I think.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the listener feels helpless because it rings so true, and it's a situation that we wish you hadn't been in, but we can't. It's over with. It can't be revisited with an aim to rescue, even if we had it in our minds and hearts to rescue. And we know that it's played out over and over and over again with different characters. And yeah, you're both making a comment about what our society tells ourselves about how we ought to feel about our lives. And that bar's pretty high, and not everybody can reach it every time in their lives. It's nice to be happy, but maybe the happiest we can be is not happy. At least in the moment. Will you take it away, sir?
Okay. Try this one. It's called Pickled Watermelon.
Yes.
On Sundays, he was never drunk. He shaved, and even on the coldest day in winter, he took you down Delancey Street, a walk you wouldn't dare to hope for, even though it happened every week. You jumped like a pup when you hit the icy streets with him, and danced up grand until you reached the thoroughfare. You walked and talked. It would have been enough without the pickle stand. But there it was, and always would be, Jack Greenfield and Sons. Well, one son, really, or the only one you ever saw, much bigger than Jack, but standing slightly back, both red-eared in bomber hats with the fur flaps up, stirring, ladling up the seeded brine to keep the open barrels from icing over. The pickled peppers were an acquired taste, the half-sours, pickled watermelon. You couldn't accept the thought of summer sweetness, turning sour in winter, believe that anyone could tolerate the flavor. Your father's eyes affirmed that it was true. One day it just might be the taste for you.
Thank you. That's kind of a commentary on what we were just talking about on the previous poem, isn't it? If you take it metaphorically, that when you're a child, the sweet thing is supposed to be sweet.
Yeah.
You wouldn't go for something that was sweet and sour.
Right.
But what is it about our palates as we ripen? That all of a sudden, in some ways, the only sweet thing doesn't ring so true.
Well, Blake knew about the songs of innocence and experience.
Yeah.
The sourness, you could say, is what we come to appreciate, or at least tolerate as we become older, and sort of as an educational
Yeah.
experience.
That's the subtle conclusion that strikes me at the end of your poem, because you don't serve it to us.
Mhm.
You just,
Well done with these food metaphors, by the way. Yeah.
I told you nothing stands between my dinner and me.
I thought this was about memory. It's turned into
I have many memories of, my mother was such a great cook. Memory to me is great food. So, but yeah, that's, I really like that about the end of the poem, that we understand that you're viewing this memory from a great distance, and one in which you've reached a point where even the watermelon can be half sour and belong to your taste.
Mhm.
But you don't, as I say, you don't serve it to us. You don't make us see it, but we feel it.
Yeah.
And that's nice, because it's a subtle kind of thing. And the farther away we can get from preaching or moralizing, usually the safer we are. People run in the opposite direction pretty fast nowadays.
It's funny, this says why it's so great to talk about our poems together. It's just dawned on me. Alcoholic beverages are like that. A kid tries to drink, it's the worst thing.
It's true.
But when you get older, it just might be the taste for you.
It's true.
So this only just occurred to me.
Well, you will remember,
Yeah.
you will not, through no fault of your own, Moxie.
Moxie.
Moxie was a soft drink, which in its original incarnation, and I'm not going to look at the audience, but there are some people in the audience ripe enough to remember Moxie. And in its original incarnation, Moxie was bitter as all hell. And as a kid, I could not understand why anybody could possibly ever want to drink it. Then it went the way of all beverages and disappeared, and then came back some years later under the same name but with a different ownership group that decided that they would sweeten it up and make it not as bracing. And that eviscerated it. It was nothing. Moxie was bitter or nothing.
It was POW, Moxie.
Yeah.
It had to give you a shot.
So if you had experienced it anywhere along the line, it would have been a latter-day version, which was sweetened and just not adequate in any way. I mean, we want our beverages to be declarative. We don't want them to be wishy-washy.
Wasn't coke eventually cocaine or?
Originally,
Yeah, so.
yeah, but that was when it wasn't illegal.
Right,
That was another time.
somewhat medicinal,
That's even before our time.
yeah. Yeah,
So,
yes,
yeah, so thank you, but I like that. And for the first time, you make the comment about your father's sobriety that will be revisited in your third poem.
yeah.
So everybody out front, keep that in mind and be on the lookout.
Something else I really like that I've been thinking about is the way you say that was and always will be about, the fruits. And then you like immediately take it back. Was and always will be, but not really.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting to look at because there's, you're looking at it from, years have gone by since that memory. And it just makes you wonder, it makes me wonder if in the moment you really did believe that, about things lasting forever, or if even at that age, because you say something about how you look forward to it, but you don't dare hope for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think that maybe on some level, young people do know things like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, certainty ain't what it used to be. But there was a time when we were kids when there were some things that just were, and you were certain. And then again, with the passage of time, it turns out that even the things that seemed most certain could be viewed in another light. But that very strong, bright light of certainty that you had as a child, and for some of us, you got to go pretty far back because it got diluted for us at one or another point along the line in our childhood. We began to see the complexities that make what Graham Greene said about character, where he said humans are not black and white, but black and gray. It's hard. There are still a few certainties, but they're not all that much fun.
That's a fantastic point you're making there. Very, very deep insight, Alexis. You're kind of ripping away or questioning our assumptions about children, about childhood, and that maybe it's hard to know through the veil of years what the child, what you remember, and what we're seeing in our poems and everything else are stories we've made up about the past. Because the memories are always clouded over like that. But if you take them away and you really look at the kid, did we know? How much did we know? What could we have known then? Which is very fertile territory, very risky territory in a way.
Well, when you get into music, it happens over and over. There are prodigies in many walks of life. But when you get into music, we very often say, how could Mozart have known what he knew at the age of 12?
Yeah.
How is this possible?
Right.
And I always come back to the thing that was said about Andres Segovia when he went to his first teacher. And his teacher said to a friend of his, this boy does not learn, he remembers. And the sense was that as a child, he was tapped into something, some Jungian great unconscious that allowed him to tap into these things where he could express emotions he'd yet to feel. And that's,
Wonderful.
I don't know, but the comment you made about the fuzziness of memory doesn't apply to her because she can remember
That's right.
those details.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, also, I was thinking, and I've been thinking about this a lot, actually. I went to a Laker game earlier this year.
Are they still in the league?
Whoa.
Oh.
Harsh.
Well,
Oh, you and your self.
He's a Knicks fan. All right, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
okay, so I was thinking about how when I was a kid, all we wanted was to be seen on the Jumbotron.
Yeah.
And how when you get on there, it's so cool. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I'm famous to everybody in the stadium for 5 seconds, and this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I was thinking about how as kids get older, when they end up on that thing, a lot of them are like, are you kidding? Like, this is so embarrassing. I don't want to be here, blah, blah, blah. You know, rolling their eyes in front of the whole stadium for the same 5 seconds that they would have killed for earlier. And I was just thinking, you know, we're talking about how some things when you're a kid, they seem certain or they seem more delightful. And I've just been thinking a lot about how, at what point does that change? I mean, I know it's obviously not the same for everybody, but is it gradual, do you think? Or, you know, because you're talking about how over time our eyes kind of start to open in terms of how things aren't necessarily black and white. And what do you think in terms of when or how that happens in childhood?
Well, the person on the Jumbotron that's older is self-conscious.
Yeah.
Mm.
But the child is other conscious, not yet self-conscious. And so there's a progression of experiences that you have that change your levels of awareness and bring you to, I'm guessing, that bring you into a stance in relationship to other people that make you feel how they see you. And that's where your sense of being self-conscious comes from. Whereas in the Edenic state of childhood, if you can call it that for some people, you're not yet. And that's why those people, if they have that as a foundation, can go through their lives and not feel self-conscious. They've got a place they can go back to where they don't have to fend off the disapproval of others because they started with a ground of acceptance and approval. I mean, I say this because that happened to be my good fortune. But I think that's why some of us can get up in front of a big audience and do things, and other people would never ever want to go there. But you look like you were going to say something. No.
Yeah, I was. No, my grandson is my lab to reality now. He's 3, and he has distinct preferences. If you say to him, you know, come sit in front of an audience, if he's in the mood, he might, but he really wants to get back to his buses and trains and taxis, and he's in that. Right, he's in a more self-involved, he's not too interested in other people. Maybe kids his age he's interested in, because he wants to check out how they do things. But I have no idea how he's going to react to crowds or fame or, you know, any of these kinds of things, or pictures of himself. He'd like to see a picture of himself, but it's not top priority. You know, much better with the little taxis.
But he's 3, so you're going to get to watch some of those layers get added or peeled.
Oh, I'm not ready.
Well, let me move ahead because I have no sense of the time. This is not a long poem, and it is not a complex poem, but what it is a purely related memory with nothing added and nothing taken away, which is to say it's all that I remember of this particular experience. There are no more details. There are no answers to the questions that it asks. And some people struggle with that when they read it or hear it because they want answers, and I don't have them. I could make them up, but I don't, at least in this poem. It's called How I Learned That I Did Not Belong. So maybe that made me self-conscious. And this is an incident that took place in Rome in August of 1972, and I was in Rome for a couple of weeks, and the poem explains itself. In a city in another country where I had never been, when I was young, while walking past a partly open door in an apartment building new to me, I saw a woman knitting at the window, looking out. I see a woman knitting at the window, looking out. Her head is turned away. I knock and move partway into the room. It is as if no one can see or hear me. I leave, and minutes later I return. The scene is still the same, but I knock louder. Again, it is as though I am not there, except that now, beyond the knitting woman, I see a man and child asleep, face down, across a bed. I walk away, unnoticed. What's up with that?
That reminds me of the movie, was it Memento? It's unexplained, but it has a deep mystery to it, which is wonderful. In other words,
It's kind of Antonioni-ish.
or something, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate the mystery in it, and it means that the poem doesn't end with the scene.
It's dreamlike, but in point of fact, it was a simple succession of experiences. Nothing added, nothing withheld.
It has an edge to it, though. I don't know. I watch endless film noir and mystery series, and it makes me. I somehow feel like there's a murderer in there someplace. Someone's gotten it.
I get that a lot as a
Yeah.
response, which
Yeah.
is interesting to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had people say, oh, the body's on the bed. Well, I mean, it says they're asleep.
Yeah.
But people go there. You know, that's where they want to take it. So all I can say is, well, but I didn't leave it open. I specified they were asleep, and yet they still want it to be open.
It invites great speculation.
Yeah, so that's the reason that I chose to read it is
Yeah.
that so many of my other poems do show something from back then and then talk about it in the light of the modern experience. And so that's how I like to play with that in terms of contrast but in this case, all of that is just shorn away. So I thought it'd be an interesting, different look at how you can treat memory in a poem, which is to simply present it and leave it.
The raw facts. That's what I like about it. What I was just discussing with Alexis here about the unvarnished memory. So there's always this tendency to make a story out of it, and you don't. And you think about it, is all the past those kinds of isolated instances where
Yeah.
we really can't penetrate with memory, we can't speculate on it. So I think, that's both scary and also very exciting in its way, when you think about that. Yeah.
It's a spectacular poem. And I have a couple of follow-up thoughts. While I was hearing it, I was thinking a lot about memory and accuracy. And just how sometimes how certain can we even be about how true our memories even are? And I'll say more about that in my next poem, but you can have a detail and then sort of think, well, no, actually, maybe this guy was wearing a striped shirt and I thought it was polka dots and blah, blah, blah. So that's, for some reason, that's something that I thought of while I was reading this, or while I was hearing it, because the details are so specific, but there's so much missing. And that kind of ties into my follow-up question, which is, when we talk about people automatically going to, oh, there's a body there, why do you think that is? Why do people want to go there?
Because we're meaning manufacturers. We're meaning factories. We're story factories. We want to, why else do we take a perfectly respectable memory and change it so that we can get a different kind of a story out of it? It's the impulse, the story impulse is really strong. I think that it should always have its place in poetry. It's not the only approach or mode, but it should always be there. I think that the development over the last 50 years in fiction, which undermines the kind of empire of story, is giving up something very important, and that we should always at least have it as something on the menu, that, because it's so innate. I mean, those cave paintings aren't just disparate. It's got to be a story of the hunt or whatever. So I mean, I think that's why we do it, and I think that's why we play very fast and loose with whether we actually have enough evidence to warrant what we make up or what we decide is happening, because we want the answer so badly that we'll jump to it without real cause. I don't know, but no charge. Okay, last round.
Okay,
This one's pretty tough, if I remember right.
yeah, this one is a little bleak. I've actually never read it aloud, ever.
Good.
Yeah, it's called Memory, We're Out of Limes. And this one is sort of about how, this one's about a sexual assault, but I was thinking just in general, in trauma and all that discussion about, blanks and certain things that you don't remember for whatever reason, maybe because it's too difficult to remember, and all the skeptics you kind of encounter. And I think I wrote this around the time all the Brett Kavanaugh stuff was happening, when people were making those accusations toward her about, well, why don't you remember this? And she kept saying that she remembered the indelible laughter, that was something that would always stick with her, even though there were all those gapes in the rest of the traumatic event. So this kind of reminds me of yours in that it's sort of holding on to specific details, just presenting them, and that's it. So, Memory, We're Out of Limes. Vomiting into the vase on the bedside table, an adult cartoon in the background. Kevin and Caroline were there. Fluorescent lights. My too short skirt. Him forcing himself on me while the men applauded. Hookah. A guy in leather handing me his baseball cap. Take it. It's yours now. I remembered tequila and lemon because the bar was out of limes. Come back to my place. Is she even conscious? Ma'am, you can't sleep in this establishment. I don't even remember who said what. Everything is out of order. I don't remember what happened first, how the night ended, or how it started.
Humans, so much wrong with them.
Yes.
I'm sorry you had that to bear witness to.
Yeah, thank you.
Makes its point though, doesn't it? In the
Yeah, I think-
absence of narrative.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of raw reporting of detail in there. A lot of essential. The limes are terrific, or to be out of limes. And you allow it to fall without connecting any of it. I mean, the piling up of detail tells us a lot. That's another way to do it without imposing a narrative. Adult cartoons. It must be like Adult Swim.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But adult cartoons are very, well, to some, now they're, there's a lot of that. There's graphic novels and everything like that. But used to be that was an oxymoron. Cartoons are for children, which makes it further. It's an added ambiguity for my use. So
It's not narrative, but in filmic terms, it's jump cuts.
yeah.
And jump cuts disorient. And that's what this does. Emotionally it's very clear, but the disorientation marries the emotional quality and makes for a really potent, damaging mixture.
Yeah. Well, you brought me back to my 20s.
Really?
Well, chaotic scenes, inebriants, not knowing quite what happened, looking back on it and trying to make a story up about it. Yeah. Mm.
Were your 20s like that?
Mine,
Any
no,
dreams? No?
no.
Hmm.
No. I to the outside observer, I was obedient. But in fact, I simply made my obedience, my obedience was the form of my rebellion.
Mm.
So when I was in the Army, I did everything they said, exactly the way they said to do it, which is to say too hard, which after a while nobody was doing, but I was still doing it. And they didn't know how to take me. They couldn't tell whether I was really with them or really mocking them. So it was easier for them to decide that I was really with them. So, but no, I didn't. Even as a musician, because I was around people who were pretty self-destructive, that wasn't really for me.
You got a really good poem out of that, about the sergeant you had.
There's a few about different sergeants, but which one do you mean? You mean the one about the one that ends with son, you were the only one that paid attention.
That one. That one.
That was his voice. So yeah, well, for another day.
That one.
Let's. I'm afraid of running out of time, so you hit us, David.
Okay. I didn't pitch any of my other books, but this is my new one,
Ah, handsome
The
looking.
Biographer.
Show it to the people.
The designer did a good job on it. So this, I would call this kind of an anti-memory kind of. Well, there's memory and anti-memory. It's playing also around with Ars Poetica. Epiphany. I learned from Joyce the name of certain times, havens held until they disappear into the mind and outer world the mind surrounds. That peaceful place, is it a place where who you are must try to do and be pours through you with the utmost clarity? Epiphany. I learned from Ezra Pound about that instant when the world stripped down to one essential scene in which the gods return to where you are, your one true home. From myself, I learned that this true home, in this green space, in just one tree perhaps, was a nest that I could build if I first named what and who might fill it in, what boys and girls in the green of Never Never Land clinging to each other as they wait for Peter Pan. In such an interlude, a pause between the major scenes and sounds, a time before my mother called me in, I found the spot a poem might begin.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, this is on the other side of self-consciousness. This is the insight and expression of self-awareness, where you identify yourself in the moment. It's a great memory to have,
Yeah,
and then to be able to write about it.
yeah. I love Peter Pan, especially. Of course, you wouldn't know about it. Maybe it's on YouTube. There was a wonderful television production. I weep to think of it, of Peter Pan on TV, and there's this wonderful Mary Martin.
Oh, the Mary Martin one. It's not.
Right.
It's not a cartoon. It's a live action Peter Pan.
Right. Did I say it was a cartoon?
No, but she
Yeah.
may know the cartoon.
Right. And it's just tremendous. And
Yeah.
she flies.
That was in 1954.
And then they rebroadcast it. I don't know which time it was, but it was so, I mean, I think that's an element of what I thought poetry, or think poetry is. And that has to do with being aloft, being in the perfect place, singing. There's a little evil in the, with Captain Hook, and a little danger, just it's a youthful kind of vision of what poetry could be, I think.
Yeah, I'm just so impressed that you can capture that it is an epiphany.
Yeah.
And for a poet, it is kind of the epiphany.
Mhm.
And yet there it is. I mean, how many of us, I couldn't do it. I can't remember when I got that kind of idea. It seemed always, it was either there, it either wasn't there or it was there, but I don't remember it arriving. But you've created this perfect little snow globe that we can look into and see it happening.
But it happens only in this poem. I mean, I didn't know that before I wrote the poem. I mean, I knew elements of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So essentially, you're talking about an epiphany that you had as a child, but you didn't really have the epiphany until you were writing the poem?
No, the poem reflects
Oh,
what I
okay.
was feeling. But I didn't know it, like,
You hadn't articulated.
hadn't articulated, yeah.
I especially like it in conversation with the other poems you chose,
Mhm.
because I really like how the first one, oh, what if I had, saved my money and then I could have won over Elaine with this porter, and then, she would love me forever. I think we have that's how it starts, and then we end with epiphany. And I think there's something really powerful about that. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that was deliberate or not, but I really, really like that.
It's a good choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Intuitive. I mean,
Yeah.
thank you.
Wow. Well, let me polish this off since I get to bring, to back clean up. This is a poem called 85 If, because I wrote it on January 31st, 2000, whenever my mother would have been 85. I wrote it on her 85th birthday, but she passed when she was 76. But I was thinking about her on her birthday, and so I wrote this. And it kind of illustrates how fortunate I've been, really, in my life. 85 If. The whump of iron on cotton. My left arm descended in a shallow arc that lulled me, affording comfort in the repetition. I stood where I have seen her stand at least 1,000 times, over the ironing board that folded down out of the wall beside the coat closet in the front room. Silent, she sat off to my left. I'd moved the chair, the one she'd never used until her sickness drove her into inactivity, from the far wall so she could see the set, the one she never watched, more easily. And it cut down the number of her steps, the one she had to take so slowly now to get there from the kitchen. Hiss of steam and gurgle from the innards of the iron would interrupt and punctuate the soft insistence of my glancing blows. I worked the surfaces with care, wagging the tip around the buttons, down the collar seams, and revving up the smooth expanses of the front and back. The easy busyness, a blessing I saw now she had enjoyed for all those years when I had watched her iron. The spray starch sputtered. I put down the can and dipped the iron's tip down to the spots of wet. Repeated questioning ensued. I pressed until the surface gleamed again. I folded up the shirts when I was done. She asked to see them, and she ran her hand so lightly over one I might have missed how much her fingers told her. It was dry, the collar starched but not too glossy, smoothed without a hint of scorching, folded up neatly, just like new. Then the pronouncement, "You do a nice job." Mild astonishment combined with pride and followed by relief had found its way into her voice. And then, directed half to me, half to herself, and quieter in a way I'd never heard, she said, "Then I won't worry now. You're in good hands." Her cancer had returned that spring. We knew what every day together meant. But we assumed a different normalcy now that she couldn't push. Her mastery over the world demanded her attention. It always had. She never dropped her guard. And hers alone. Depression child, she'd lit a candle at the altar. Self-reliance would be her creed. She couldn't quite believe a job she might have done could ever be done really right by anybody else. And surely not as well. So why have help? She did it all, and did it all herself. She pounded through 10,000 dinners, paid the bills, hectored my dad, and got him moving, although never at the pace she would have liked. Was cornucopia to family and friends. She was the whirlwind. And our world emerged out of her will, spun ceaselessly. For her, there had been no easing of spurs until her body wouldn't carry her. So now, she let go. And like horses loosed so long ago she had forgotten them and saw them as though new when they returned. The lessons came. I think she was surprised to learn how trusting me to do for her would make her feel, after a lifetime, mine, when it had been the other way around. I hope it brought her back to 5 again, when parents would provide, and to accept was all her role, before her march began and she put up her arms against the world. I know it was a lesson learned in time to let her turn to me to help her die. For later in the hospital, weeks after the doctors told me, any time now, days before the end, I at her bedside, by ourselves, she said, half puzzled, half dismayed, "What's happening to me? I don't like it." I didn't have to search for what to say. "You're still facing this world," I said. "You need to turn and face the other way." And she, who'd shook the earth and might have upbraided heaven, took it to heart and said yes to it all. So we moved closer as she moved away. There have been lives more blessed, but ours will do. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, David. Thank you, Alexis. This has been special. I hope that it would be special to have an audience with us. I was glad that some of you could not help but make yourselves known. That's only right. Thanks so much to Poetry by the Sea for giving us, a place to stand and a lever long enough. And, we've moved at least the furniture, if not the world. So thank you very much. Do we have a few minutes before 5:45? We do. We have 11 minutes. So we invite commentary, brickbats, whatever is your pleasure.
Al, remind people how they can find Poems On.
Oh, very good. And thank you. This is somebody that knows the drill. Allison Joseph has been a guest. I'm going to edit these files and get them together and put them on and show them on Zoom on the 3rd Thursday of June, most likely. And I'll see if I can, anybody who's not already on the invitation list, I'd be happy to put you on the invitation list. But for people who don't, for whom it's inconvenient to tune in for a couple of hours on that Thursday night. I archive the shows the next morning at my YouTube channel. And my YouTube channel is Al Basile 9, ALBASILE numeral 9. And all the Poems On shows are there, including the one with Alice and Joseph, and with Melissa Belmain, and I know this, and with Ned and Jane. And, you know, you can tell how, there you are, Ned. You can tell how much fun it is to do these, and thank you for being here while we did it. What else you got? Yes, sir.
There's a comment that ends in an invitation for you to riff. I'm thinking about this Richard Wilbur poem, the one where a figure that is apparently the real Richard Wilbur, along with the figure of the real Richard Wilbur's wife and Richard Wilbur's real mother-in-law meet with the real Sylvia Plath, and he tries to talk her into living, right? I think it's called Cottage Street, 1953. And the thing that's interesting to me about that poem is the note that Wilbur put at the end, where he says, this memory is composite, but it's true in all essential details.
Yeah.
In other words, I made this up,
Yes.
but it's really true.
Yes.
And it feels to me like the making it up is some of what makes it poetry as opposed to memoir. One of the things, Al, that you did in your poem that was so uncanny is you presented to us raw. This is my complete memory. What do you think about that distinction between memoir, the uninvented, unembellished fact, as opposed to the imaginative enterprise of poetry?
I wouldn't worry about it except by way of naming. In other words, if I were to make, because facts and truth have an elastic relationship. But what does it mean to use your own life, make some things up, and not call it a memoir? What does it mean to call it a memoir? I don't know whether people have different expectations nowadays for memoir, but if they expect facts from memoir rather than truth, then I would probably shy away from calling something a memoir. But I think it's just a question of whether you believe in categorization, because what you're trying to get at is the truth through either the imagination or the facts working in some kind of relationship. What we're trying to do is to make the reality of an experience present for the listener or for the reader. And how you do that or what you call it is pretty secondary to me. I don't know. What do you guys feel?
Yeah, my book started about 5 years ago as an attack on memoir.
There you go.
Because I don't like all this self-revelation that sits there and asks for attention and personal attention, and it was annoying to me. And then as I went along writing poems against memoir, they increasingly picked up my personal experiences to the point that it was almost like an autobiography. So I'm useless in this to answer this.
Well, and that also, it begs the question of what we do consciously and what we do unconsciously. Because when we're doing our best to recall something accurately that did happen, I mean, have you seen Rashomon?
No.
We'll talk. It's a movie about 3 different people witnessing the same event and having 3 utterly different stories about what happened. So even when we're doing our best to simply present things as they happen, our unconscious is hard at work, either subverting our conscious intentions or supporting them or transcending them or mocking them or whatever. And we don't have control over that aspect of the dynamic, the personal dynamic. So how else would it be possible for us to write things that contain truths we didn't know? To go back to Mozart, which I want to end with this because I love this anecdote about Mozart, which I hope is true, but maybe it's made up. I don't know. Where when he was about, 21, a young composer, maybe 10, came to him and said, "I want you to teach me how to write a symphony." And Mozart said, I can't teach you how to write a symphony. And the kid said, "Well, but you wrote one when you were 8. And Mozart said, "Yes, but I didn't have to ask anyone how to do it." So, and we all contain that potential, to express something beyond our awareness. So, I don't know, my attitude is however you get there, whatever you call it, I don't care, just give me something that's, that's beating, not burnt.
Amen.
Well, thank you all. We can all go to dinner. And again, special thank you to David Katz and Alexis Sears. And I hope we didn't give you too hard a time for being a million years younger than we are. That's not your fault.
What's your theory of time?
What?
The theory of time.
She may be an old soul.
Yes.
As a matter of fact,
Yeah, a lot of
that's
issues.
Yeah, you won't get an argument from me about that. But it's also true that we are young souls.
young soul.
Oh, smart, yeah.
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 Okay. You guys give me a hand on the.
Wonderful.
I'm so